Welcome to Six and the Six. Tonight's fabulous guest, and hopefully I don't butcher this, Peter PJ Niegsch.
Yeah, pretty good.
Hey,
Yeah.
wow. How pretty good? What would good be?
The way that I've pronounced it my entire life is niche.
Oh,
Um, the actual German way, you kind of swallow the G, so it's somewhere in between niche and how you pronounced it.
yeah. I was thinking I knew there was some German in there, so I was more like, okay, how would a German? Okay, that was either way. I would have been close. Okay, cool. PJ, what's up?
Not too much. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here. It's been a long time coming, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
For anyone who doesn't know PJ, head coach of the Roberts Wesleyan University women's JV soccer team and goalie coach across all levels. Pretty cool stuff. Get the head coach and still work with the goalies. Before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your soccer history. What got you going? I know you're GK related or at least lover of all GK. So how did that start with you? How did that journey go?
So, if I'm being totally honest, I don't actually remember how I became a goalkeeper. Um, I growing up, played local rec leagues. I think around 10 or 11, I moved I played for the Penfield Rangers. So I was playing just local travel. Um, and as long as I can remember, I was a goalkeeper. Again, don't really know why that was the case. I was never the biggest person in the world. Um, and so that was just what I was growing up playing. I ended up playing briefly in high school and then decided that I was going to pursue other things, and eventually came back around to being in the soccer world and back into the goalkeeping world.
What um what is it about the goalkeeping position, one back in your Penfield days that kept you going in there, kept you wanting to, keep playing and not try something else? And it's probably the same thing, but what pulled you back in later back into that position? What excites you about it?
Um, Honestly, I think it had a lot to do with the personal accountability side. It's a position where you kind of make or break the situations. If you make a mistake, if there's an error on your end, um, there's very clear things you can work on, and that's having clear goals and clear objectives. I think is a cool thing about goalkeeping and something that draws me to it. When things are very ambiguous, sometimes it's very difficult to solve those problems. And so I think growing up, it was just a very straightforward thing for me to focus and work on. And I can do those things in a smaller environment as opposed to, it's a very individual thing. In many ways, the work itself, at least how I experienced it. Um, and that was something that, you know, go out, have one other person, and you can work on all of these different things. And that's just kind of the direction that I think pulled me. That one of the other sports that I played in high school was golf, and that's a very similar mindset where it's internal. There's a mental strength piece that goes along with that, where you're working for yourself. There's nobody to blame in most scenarios but yourself. And how do you work through those things?
The biggest difference to me between soccer and golf, which I've done both of, is I don't end up throwing my clubs in soccer.
True. Because you don't have a club, or
Hey, whatever the reason is, the club does not get caught in a tree, which I need to climb. You said a couple interesting things in there, and the first thing that stood out was the kind of I'll say the comparison between positions and what's considered acceptable or good. If you're a forward and you're, two of five shots, one of five shots go in, you're like, okay, keep trying, you'll get the next one. And if we're back between the pipes for us, and we're saving 1 out of 5. We're getting the fish hook.
Yep. Yeah. There's a very different set of criteria that is considered successful as a goalkeeper. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. So I kind of on that too. So the other problem, and you talked about the mental piece of that. So if you combine the kind of the expectations, and I think some of the expectations are self brought on, and some are obviously part of the game, but everybody's eyeballs, if you're out in the field, maybe the eyes are on you, maybe they're on somewhere else, but by the time it gets into the 18, everybody is watching you, hero or goat. It's kind of like, how do you, how did you deal with that pressure being in the cage yourself of, managing like, and how have you brought that into your coaching to kind of work with the keepers of keeping that perspective?
Um, so personally, I think one of the things that I tried to do is ignore most of the external. Um, and this relates directly to the coaching piece too, is control what you can control. There's all of these different variables that are existing outside of you being in goal. There's certain things you can affect. There's certain things that you can't affect. If somebody decides to just hit an absolute spectacular shot, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And so in those scenarios, recognize that, hey, maybe there's nothing I can do about that specifically. Was there something that I could have communicated in the lead up to that? Is there something that I could have affected differently? Not the shot itself or the shot stopping piece, but can I affect something else in that scenario? And really, really trying to remove the noise in a lot of ways. And then also in game scenarios, um, you know, you can make minor adjustments, but in game, there's not a lot you're not, even in warm-ups, you're not gonna make major adjustments. You're not gonna say, oh, hey, you're doing X, Y, and Z. Let's work on that. It's getting comfortable, working on your consistency, your confidence in those moments. Then after the fact, you can always go back and work on bigger concepts, but controlling what you can control in that moment, and then just doing everything you can, working as hard as you can on the field, and then working as hard as you can off the field after the fact on those bigger concepts.
Yeah, I think it's important to your point of recognizing a good quality shot, something going upper 90 is that what a snipe that was. But I think it almost plays against our nature as goalies, kind of that perfectionist. I want to get to everything. A lot of times I think it's hard for us to be like, okay, that was a really great shot, PJ. You did. Good luck next time though, right? I think it's hard to instill that attitude of appreciation of how we got beat, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, and it's frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating in that moment. Um, I So for me personally, I actually went through, and this is more related to the golf side. I think golf taught me a lot of the mental strength side of things, because if you hit a bad shot in golf, there's ways to recover. If you get frustrated and you let that snowball, there are significant consequences to that. And I think bringing that into the goalkeeping world, it's the same scenario of not letting that dictate the next thing, not holding on to that frustration or anger, or even directing it at teammates. That sometimes is kind of a reaction of, everybody makes mistakes at some point. Making sure to channel those situations positively, and not let it stew in your brain in that moment. And I know we've talked about this, short memory. In game scenarios, short memory is great. Like, you have to have that short memory while still learning, because if a striker is in on goal 2 times and they do the same thing and score on you both times, while you want to forget and not pull yourself down in that scenario, you still want to learn from it because, hey, okay, I know this striker is right-footed. What can I do to now limit that right foot, and learn from that and learn in real time while still not letting it negatively impact your mental side.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I know we've talked about this before, and apologies to Ted Lasso, but I'm not a huge fan of mind like a goldfish. From the perspective of, I think in the moment, game or practice is easier, but especially game, I think we need a quick reflect of, okay, how am I going to do that differently next time that scenario develops? Not that there's ever two same shots. Then I think you can, and I would not even say necessarily dump it, but maybe store it somewhere for future reference. So I just, to me, there's too much of, oh, just forget it, get the next one. But if there's never, like you said, in that process of self-correction, we're kind of destined to make the same mistake again next time.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between um, taking information in and learning from it in real time in a game scenario and letting it turn into a negative, like letting your head drop, letting your communication style change. There's a very real difference between you know, pushing that little bit harder, and you'll hear me many times say, "Go next." Like that's what we're doing. We're going next. Um, that doesn't mean forget it. That means your situation is now different. So if you were up 2 goals and now all of a sudden you're only up one, um, you're going next. You're doing the next thing. It's whatever that next thing is, but the scenario has now shifted. And so, what did you learn from that? Um, it might it might dictate a communication change, but my whole philosophy is always from a positive perspective, trying to take it and move it in that positive direction instead of the negative, because I've never found that the negative really serves players and serves even coaches in a lot of ways, um, because that's most of my negative experiences have come from pushing negatives or that communication style being more on the negative side versus the positive reinforcement. You can obviously always work and point out areas of improvement or areas we can improve upon, work on. Hey, this didn't develop the way that we expected to. There's communication styles that I think can help to frame conversations with players that um, doesn't create that frustration, doesn't put players down, and also then creates an atmosphere where, hey, something bad happens in a game. Okay, what's the next thing?
Yeah, I think to that point too, it's important for us as coaches, and I know you do a great job of it too, of getting to know the players at a little deeper level so you can kind of fine tune that communication because some players, once you develop that relationship, you can be a little harder on them and they even want it. And some are still like, I'd prefer a little more life breathed into me. And I think words, just the words we use, right? Instead of saying, hey, what was wrong there? Can we use things more like, hey, what could be better? And then how are you going to do it? But I also think we forget the other side of that. Like when they do something really good, instead of just cheering like a maniac on the sideline, it's like remind them, hey, what went well?
Right.
And
And
why? Because that also helps create some like mental anchors when they're struggling. They can be like, hold on, I did this last time. I got this.
right, and being specific with that information. That's an important piece, because if you just say, hey, you played well, okay, great. So then they're gonna possibly form an idea, which may be right. But if you were referencing specific things, be specific with that information you're supplying. It's the same thing with communication on the field. Is the communication should be specific, concise, and helpful. You don't want to just say, there's certain scenarios, but you don't just want it to be, hey, that was good. Like that can be good in that moment, just as like a quick bump, but at the same time, um, hey, that was a good one too. So then now that player all of a sudden recognizes that's what you're looking for, and you do it again and you do it again because you recognize that's something that you've done well, and you continue to work on that. So
Yeah, I definitely think specifics better. I think it can sound a little insincere if it's too high level too often. Hey, great job today. Geez, thanks. Were you really watching anything?
right,
So, it's funny because the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about, we were talking about kind of letting things go, remembering. I think if we don't have some kind of communication with our inner self-doubter, we can we can let them run that dialogue for us, and it it kind of reinforces what we were thinking ahead of time, like, oh, I knew I couldn't get those, or I knew I wasn't good at those, which is that's a lot of pressure you put on yourself and pulls away from the present, along with the future of, like, when that starts building up, then the next natural thing is, boy, I have to make this next save,
right.
or my team's gonna be mad at me, or I'm gonna get pulled, or I'm gonna, whatever. And now how the heck are you supposed to play in the moment and make any save? So it's a balancing act in there somewhere. And as we know, it's tough to help them through that.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that coin is while being specific is helpful, sometimes I fall into the trap of being overly specific, and there are scenarios where you overcoach. Um, you're starting to give too much information, and focus on this one thing. Like this was the one thing. Let's be specific about this one thing that you did well. Um, if and in many cases, the players know the things that they may have done wrong, and that's the other piece is having the respect for the player because they do know. Um, sometimes they don't want to hear it out loud. And sometimes that's not helpful to verbalize it either because the player does know it. Um, and to your point, being able to read that, and as you create those, as you understand the player and what they need in those moments, that can help influence your communication style and making sure that you're doing what is best for them and what they need in that moment.
Yeah, totally. Don't turn your coaching style into the car ride home. It's like, yeah, yeah, I know, I know. I think the other thing there, you made me think of, you were saying that, especially game time or scrimmage time or something like that, us as coaches, I think, have a tendency to see something happen and be like, oh, eh, that was because of that. That's what the issue is, without asking, hey, why did you make that decision? Because I think there's an important line between I read everything correctly and made the wrong choice versus I read the situation incorrectly but made the correct choice. So it's easy from the sideline to think we know what they saw, but until we ask them what they saw in front of them, it changes our dialogue too with them.
Yeah, yeah, and we have the luxury of being able to watch without um, without having to make too many decisions in real time as coaches. Sure, we're able to see different things, but that's because we're watching different things, and we're paying attention to other variables because we're not worried about saving the ball. Like that is not what we're worried about in that moment, and that can sometimes be totally different than what the player is seeing, and that's okay. Um, because again, having an understanding and respecting what the player is experiencing on the field is, I think, an important part of hopefully being a good coach. Um, because we don't see everything, we don't hear everything, and that's sometimes influential when it comes to how the game actually unfolds and what decisions are made.
Yeah, I think of that often when it comes to, like, PKs. And my worldly good mindset advice is like, oh, well, the pressure is not on you, it's on the shooter because everyone expects them to score. And you get that look like, okay, coach, you stand in here and save it.
Yep.
It's- Yeah, well, I didn't mean it that way. So yeah, it's an interesting approach to be a little more vulnerable as a coach and kind of, you get their perspective on things, which is, and you know, you've worked with me a little. It's why sometimes I like to stop it and say, hey, how would you make this better for what you're, don't let me dictate your development. How can we tweak this? And it goes back to having that relationship where they're comfortable saying, hey, coach, yeah, this part of your plan, so let's change that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said for um, empowering players to make those decisions, because again, we're not the ones on the field who are going to end up making the decisions. Our goal is to prepare them as best as we can, but in those moments, they have to be the ones to be creative, think on the fly, make those decisions, and making sure that the players feel empowered to do that, I think, is an important piece because, you know, some of the best coaches in the world, they have a specific way of playing. They want you to do these specific patterns of play. Um, that's all well and good, but if it breaks down, then what? Because not everything always functions unless you're even Manchester City. Like things don't always function exactly the way that Pep wants things to function, and so how do you then problem solve in those scenarios and make sure that the players feel comfortable being able to do that?
Yeah, kind of keeping that creativity in there and that which spawns unpredictability, which I think is a good thing. That thought applied to the goalkeeping position, though. I think the other thing, if we're not careful as coaches, we can almost start to develop robots. Like you're supposed to do the save this way, and it's supposed to, in this scenario, it's supposed to look like that. And we don't always appreciate the fact that they're all going to approach those save motions, those scenarios differently based on, you know, body size, thought process, who knows what, maybe they got caught out of position. So I think it's important to instill that, hey, make the save the way you feel like making it.
Yep. And again, we're there to try and put you in the best position in that moment. And if there's so many variables that exist, if one variable is off, then can you still save the ball? If so, great. That's what matters.
Yeah, I said, and kind of to your point of coaching, and let's stick to a point or two and not overwhelm them with information. I say it a lot. I'm like, well, that was point one out of 10,100,000 or something. 10,000, would that make sense? 10,100,000. It's that there's so many like pieces to it. You can just like overwhelm quickly. Speaking of overwhelm, that like way back to the beginning, something you said interested you about the position was kind of a lack of ambiguity and kind of, um, everything kind of structured and processed, and I know what's going on. Um, it made me think, did that like, is that same thought process of what got you into a career of kind of working with computers and systems and little logical approach to life?
Um, in hindsight, probably. I tend to view things from a very logical place. That's just the way that I've always functioned. The the professional side, working in tech, I think that was just due to growing up with computers. I was the person that my parents would have fix everything, and so that was just kind of a natural development. But I think from the goalkeeping side, um, oversimplifying it, it's very binary. You save it or you don't save it, and that was where that kind of came from. Of to your point, there's a logic to it, and pushing yourself to improve and having very clear goals slash metrics to be able to measure yourself on, um, even professionally. And I've asked Coach Mack this many times. Hey, how am I doing? What can I do better? Having that feedback, I think, as a goalkeeper, the feedback usually, did you save it? or didn't you? There's direct and immediate feedback.
Right. It's funny because for me and the way I approach um working with players, the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth to me. It's like for a while I'll be like, oh, I've got to be detailed and very, specific in regard to what we're doing. And then it'll swing back to where I kind of am now, where it's like, okay, what do we need to do today? What's your current sore spot? And it's almost like pulling it together on the fly, which sometimes is stressful and sometimes it works out well and sometimes it doesn't. It's but I'll swing back to the other side where, oh, everything's got to be planned to the minute. And
Yeah, and I think working with you has helped me to shift to that direction a little bit, because there's no one way to coach, and not every player needs a coach that does things one way or the other. Especially when you're working with multiple keepers, it might be different. Um, Within a group of keepers, they might appreciate one type versus the other, and being able to grow as a coach to be able to have that multifaceted communication style and session style, I think is an important piece that working with you has definitely helped me to
yeah,
grow in that scenario. Um, because even there's been sessions that we've run together where you'll just be like, hey, what do you think about this? How can we build this drill? And I know you ask the goalies that too, and I think um, that's incredibly helpful from a learning perspective. And it's also, I think, a great opportunity um, to learn. It exposes weaknesses sometimes, um, in the communication and in what we're trying to work on, because you know you're on the fly, and sometimes that's a good thing. Exposing those weaknesses, especially in practice sessions, I think is a positive, as long as they're identified and then moved moved forward. So
yeah, it's funny. It's funny how often that approach to developing them is perceived as, boy, are you sure you know what you're doing? As opposed to, I think it's actually the other side of that coin where it actually is maybe a little more on the advanced side of being able to like put that stuff together quickly and work. But I don't, maybe that's insanity. I don't know.
yeah, a little bit of insanity is
A
good.
little bit. Hey, we work with the goalies. We have to be crazy, right?
That's the case. Yep.
So speaking of that, when did you catch the coaching bug? I mean, you said you wanted to get back into it. Kind of get back into it as a coach, as a, what drove you into that?
Um, Good luck more than anything. So I've always loved the game. Um, while I stopped playing, I still follow it. I watch as much soccer as I possibly can, regardless of league, if it's available and online across one of the multiple streaming services that exist.
We were just talking about this.
Yep. If it's there and I'm able to pull it up, I pull it up. So I think it's derived from just loving the game, and loving watching the game and being a part of it. And I had actually just recently moved back to Rochester, um, right as COVID shut everything down. And during that time period, the opportunity arose um, for assisting Coach Mack just in the winter season, um, because the existing JV coach was moving, and so because of that, they reached out to me because um, she's actually my sister-in-law. She reached out to me and said, "Hey, I know you love soccer. There's this opportunity. I can put your name in if you'd like that." And so I was like, "Yes, definitely. I love the game. Sure, let's give this a shot." Um, Coach Mack was gracious enough to let me stick around and just kind of hang out, watch. help where I could, which primarily chasing balls, doing things like that.
Yep.
Uh, but it's, even on that level, I just love being around the game. I just love being there. A bad day at practice, like a bad practice, if I'm in a bad mood, it's still so much better than anything else that's going on. It's one of those. It's while draining because of time commitments, things like that. It's still such a positive experience, regardless of whatever happens on that day. And it's just kind of built from there and slowly working because I'm very new at this. So I'm just slowly working up, trying to improve where I can and learning from people like yourself and Coach Matt.
You hit upon to me two of the three huge um things in my mind that make for a good coach. And I think the third one is a kind of a maybe a byproduct of the two. One, you're learning and continuing, you're watching, absorbing, thinking of different things, bringing those things. How can we apply those so that we've talked about it, right? My favorite saying is you can't follow a stop sign. So we can't expect our goalies to follow us and learn if we're stagnant. That's the one piece of it. The other one is just, you're having a really bad day and you show up and it just your energy and your love and your passion for the game show through, and that's contagious. Just as a bad attitude's contagious. So, and it all comes down to, really caring about who you're working with and loving that and loving the game. So I think you hit on two of the three of those. How do you instill that love for that game, that passion, that continuously learning? How do you push that down into the athletes you're working with? How do you get them to value those same things?
Um, that's a good question. Um, so in some of the way that I communicate things, um, just not on the field necessarily, but outside, um, I try and bring in other forms of soccer content, viewing, things like that at times, where I'll ask players, oh, have you heard about this? Have you seen this? Are you watching this game? Um, a lot of the players, I don't think, are at the same level of obsessiveness with watching as I am. Um, but at the same time, um, I think trying to expose more of the game itself, make it more of, hopefully again, instilling the love for the game, making it more about enjoying the game, because even for my experiences in high school, like my experiences in high school, I didn't love playing the game in those moments. It was just that was a sport that I played. Um, and so building on that and making sure that while even our sessions, you can be competitive, you can work hard, you can do all of those things while still having fun and enjoying the game. And I think sometimes that gets lost, especially when you start talking about playing at a higher level, especially at the collegiate level, because once you're there, you've been playing for 10 years. And there's the possibility that, maybe that love isn't there because it just was what you do. Um, so how do you make your sessions enjoyable, while still pushing each other? And I think some of that comes down to team culture as well, making sure players on a team are maintaining that positive attitude and lifting people up, because I think that's a critical part. Because even if you don't love soccer, but you love being on the field with your teammates, I think that will naturally just merge together into that love of soccer, whether that extends out after into coaching or being involved in soccer in other ways. I can't speak to that, but um, the game itself, I just think it's a great game. I think there's so many positives that can come from it. There's so many learning experiences that can come from it. as well. What life lessons, and I think that if we as coaches can at every opportunity make those experiences positive, maybe that will eventually lead to a love of the game if it doesn't currently exist. Um, but
Yeah, boy, I totally agree. And you hit on one of my primary objectives is to breathe life into and not suck it out of the athletes we're working with to, like you mentioned, create an enjoyable experience. Because if we're having fun, we're going to invest more into it, which means we're going to get more out of it, which means we're going to see results. And it's just this big positive, and not Pollyanna positive. It's just a big positive upward spiral. And I think it's really important in goalie world to instill that because and I'm really big on, hey, let's all get along and support each other. Yeah, it's going to be tough. And there's going to be days you show up and don't want to support your other two goalies because only one of you is playing. So of course you want the minutes, but we can choose to be destructive and hateful and negative and all that towards each other, or we can lift each other up and at least realize, even if, even if I'm the number three, that because I worked so hard, she's better.
yep,
And but boy, that is hard to do. And because everyone wants to play, of course they do. That's why we're playing.
right, yeah, and that's I think making sure that it doesn't become um, mechanical. You touched on this as well. Making sure it's not a mechanical thing either. We don't practices and sessions. They're not going to be fun if it's mechanical and saying, "Hey, we're going to do this every single time," or we're going to, um, if the mindset of players is not around making each other better, and I think that's where I know Coach Mack talks about it all the time when it talks about servant leadership. Like you as a teammate, you're there to serve your teammates in many ways. Um, when you're in a drill, making sure that you're doing your best, because if you have a poor touch, that can then affect everybody else's experience within that drill. So while you're working on yourself, what can you be doing to make sure you're supporting your teammates? And one of the things that um, I notice at the highest levels, even giving away corners, maybe not the greatest thing in the world from danger of defending and everything else. But if you give away a corner because you defended well, that should be celebrated every single time. Like, sure, you didn't head the ball out for a throw in or clear it out to a midfielder or forward. That's fine, but they didn't score. Now we have another opportunity to defend well, and then do the next thing. And all of those things should be celebrated. Um, and even for, and you touched on it here, if you're not the starter, if you are getting 5 minutes here, play as hard as you can for those 5 minutes, because those 5 minutes are important. Like big 5 minutes, those are your big five. And
Yeah, for
so
sure.
as you're working through those, you got 5 minutes, make your impact. And that impact could be making sure that we don't concede. That 5 minutes, or in goalkeeper world, you get an opportunity in spring games to play. Like those are critical minutes for creating those relationships with defenders, especially when we talk about um, underclassmen. If there's time and there is opportunity, whether you know it or not, as a freshman, sophomore, junior, you might be the starter your senior year. There's places to work. There's, as long as we're continually working forward and raising everybody else up around us, then that's hopefully just going to be a positive experience for even those who aren't the starters.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's easy to say and it's easy for everyone to agree to that. But when you're that last person on the bench, working your butt off and like, oh man, I'm still not getting what I want. That's when the test of the character and the love of your team comes out. And I just think it's so human nature to always look for the negative of stuff, that your point of celebrate. It's like those little things like, hey, just good job on that. Or, hey, I see you when someone's slumping. It's just that supportive environment is just so huge to the whole thing, the fun, the everything we've been talking about.
Yep.
Um, so another interesting thing, and maybe it's just me, but you said you weren't the biggest goalie, a little on the smaller side, and you end up in the women's game working with the women's keepers who I think from a physical standpoint generally typically aren't as tall as their male counterparts. Um, Not a plus, not a minus, just I think typically what it is. Um, have you found your experience as not being a 6'6" keeper beneficial and kind of working and focusing on the things we control, not being that, the high, the angling, how can we deal with situations differently, not, how did that help you?
Yeah, I think so. To that point, just to point out how small I was, um, I was probably 5'5" going into my senior year of high school. And so at that point, the guys around me were 6'2", 6'3". Um, and that's right. There's a certain point where, you get some diminishing returns regardless of how athletic you might be. That extra, almost 2 feet of wingspan um, creates some interesting things.
You're the little shrub surrounded by oak trees.
Yeah. Uh, yep. But that I think I think what that does do is um, it helps to identify, to your point, how you can still problem solve with a different set of criteria. So for me, I was a little bit more athletic. And so it was more of the being able to jump high, being able to lift off earlier, being a little bit quicker because I was smaller. And so that might have been, I was more aggressive on coming out because I was quicker and able to do that, closing down those angles earlier. Um, and I think that's something that um, even my first year at Roberts, um, there's a difference between a keeper being small and a keeper not being a good keeper. And I think that misconception needs to be thrown out because there's keepers of all sizes, even at the professional level. Sure, there's a lot of very large keepers at the professional level, but there's also relatively shorter keepers that exist. Um, and they're still absolutely incredible because they have great footwork, they have great hands. Their awareness of the game is at a level where that extra 5 inches of wingspan doesn't really affect them at all because they've taken that extra step, or they recognize that I need to drop step a half second earlier to make that save. And I think it's such a, going back all the way, circling back to the um, personal effort and ability as a goalkeeper. It's such a personal endeavor that you're working on yourself. How can you solve that problem? Because there is a solution. Like, you are able to solve that problem regardless of what others might tell you. Yep, you can make that save. And I think goalkeepers while we tend to be very self-critical, um, that can sometimes lead to a lack of faith in our abilities, a lack of understanding of, can you get to that ball? You don't think you can get there? I think you can get there. Like that happens quite often because it's a scenario where, well, you haven't made that save in real time because maybe you haven't had the opportunity, or there's a mental switch there that hasn't clicked saying, oh yeah, I can get there. And so you're frozen. But until you see that and make that save, sometimes that creates that little mental block that exists.
Yeah, and even worse sometimes. I've had this scenario where a keeper comes in and has that mental block that's been instilled by a former coach, um, because of some physical attribute, you're not able to do this. Said who?
Right.
Right. And then the thing is like, and usually my first response, sometimes in my head, depending is, and you believe them? I mean, why'd you buy that? But I think it goes back to a word you said, awareness. You were talking about awareness of kind of what's in front of you. But how about our own awareness if we're being honest with ourselves as, hey, I'm 5'5". I'm going to struggle in this situation, or I do struggle in this situation. Can we be aware of what those, I don't, struggles are? I don't want to call them deficiencies or weaknesses, but what my, where am I going to struggle? But sometimes, again, humans like to look at the negative side. We don't think about, okay, how can I use that to my advantage? But then for me, how can we take that? And we need to help them as coaches. How can we take that awareness of theirs and bake it into a purposeful approach to them working on whatever we're working on that day, right? Let's say we're working on getting back to the bar. Okay, I'm 5'2". How is that going to look for me as opposed to my goalie world partner who's 5'6"?
Yeah.
So I think but you've got to know within yourself because I can't be you. You
Yeah.
know, I wish I was you, but geez, I'm not. Don't quit lying to myself. I can't do that.
Right. And that I think, to your point, part of part of that is an internal understanding and being honest with yourself. The other part is hopefully having um, mentors, coaches, individuals around that empower you to work on those things. Because I don't think there's ever a you can't do this. It's always a scenario where how do you solve it? What are you going to do? Um, because you can do it, especially in a sporting scenario. Like very rarely as a goalkeeper is there something that you cannot do. There is a way to solve it. It's just how you personally can solve it. And that's also why creating robots isn't great either, because all of us have different strengths. We have different abilities. And so making sure that we're not saying, oh, you should be able to do this in this moment exactly the same way as this other keeper is just an unhealthy way to go about it.
Yeah, and I say that all the time when I present situations for them. And I'm like, yes, you're going to struggle, but solve the puzzle. Every puzzle has a solution. It may not be easy, but it has a solution. And then the other thing, that can't thing, I like to say there's three words we do not allow in goalie world: can't, should, or would. Eh, There is no can't. You're still working on it. Should have. What should you have done? The only thing you should have done is keep the ball out of the net. I don't, is there such a thing as an ugly save? I don't know. Save's a save.
I think I think you can I think you can call a save ugly while it's still being a save. Um, I think there's scenarios where it's like, ooh, that was bad, but I did it.
But
So
it's not in the net. That's one of those pendulum things with me. I'm like, I go back and forth on that one. I say it was a save, so it couldn't have been that bad. Um, and I hate that would, I would have. Well, then why didn't you? What was it, Yoda? Do or do not. There is no try. I mean, pick a side, do something there.
yep.
Which brings me to another interesting thing. We talked about mentoring and leading and kind of observing and learning. Um, Talk about the value of learning from each other in goalie world. From the coaches, obviously, as kind of guides in their journey, but how do you get them to appreciate and actually observe each other to say, hey, that's interesting how she tried that for that. I wonder if I do that, or maybe I should try that. And that kind of goes back to that learning thing we talked about too. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, um, I think the application is outside of goalie world as well, but having individuals with different skill sets that see and experience things differently, I think is critical in improving just about everything. I think in goalkeeping world specifically, it's that problem solving piece because um, I might, let's say I am better with my drop step and getting back into position. Um, just because my drop step is more efficient doesn't mean that your way of doing it isn't quicker. That might be just the way that I do it because of my skill sets. Um, and it might be that I'm taking 4, 5, 6 steps, but then the keeper next to me has a slightly different way of doing it and they're taking 2 steps and they're set. And all of a sudden I see that, or let's say that conversation happens because, and this is the piece about uplifting your teammates. While there is a competitive element, especially in goalkeeper world, you're trying to be that starter if you can. But making those minor suggestions or saying, hey, to your point, hey, did you try that? Have you tried this? What do we think about this? And sometimes it's, yep, I thought about that. This works better for me. And that's okay. But at the same time, having those differing abilities, skill sets, I think creates different ways to problem solve. And to your point, it's not a binary way of saving the ball. There are different ways. And so we've talked about which leg you put down, near post or far post. And I'm right on board with you. That's preference. What feels more comfortable to you to save the ball in that scenario? I think it's that collaborative side of goalkeeping. And I think if you don't have that collaboration, I don't think the goalkeeping profession, position will continue to evolve. It takes somebody doing something that seems ridiculous in order to evolve the position. Like my favorite player, Manuel Neuer, that he is an absolutely incredible shot stopper, but he is a sweeper keeper. He is a player that is just so good with the ball at his feet that he's essentially an outfield player. And so he completely changed the way that goalkeeping exists. And that's why we see everybody playing out from the back now. Because you expect goalkeepers, and that's something that I never had growing up. I never had the technical training to work on being able to distribute the ball in ways with my feet that keepers can now. And I think if you're not having keepers push each other, try new things, the position's going to stagnate. And unfortunately, if it's not the position, then maybe it's the keepers that we're working with. And so always allowing for that creative element and developmental side of things, I think, is an important piece.
Yeah, totally. One of the cool things that's happened to me a number of times is kind of that watching and learning thing is, sometimes you need to stop and just say, hey, you three, talk about it. And first they kind of look at you like, what? Just discuss what just happened, right? Oh, and then you get that dialogue going with them. And eventually you end up getting kind of what we have right now in our goalie world, in that, Nick in particular is like, hey, look at it this way and do that way. And you start to get some of that without even prompting, just that natural tendency of um, coaching peer, if you will, just kind of helping along in those dialogues going back and forth. And to me, that means we've won, at least at that level of our coaching job.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that in our scenario with 3 goalkeepers, they're all experiencing our sessions differently, and when they collaborate to solve problems, because sometimes we'll go through a specific drill and there'll be a new addition to the drill, and they'll talk about it. To your point, they'll come out with some, hey, I think we're doing this. Like, I noticed you were doing this a little bit. Maybe try this. And that, I think, and as long as it's taken the right way, I think it's incredibly beneficial to the goalkeeping world as a whole. And that's only ever going to work if you're fostering, to your point, and I think this is all you. I've been a bystander, but the goalkeeping world that you fostered is one of um, collective improvement. It's all about working together, and making sure that everybody feels valued in what they're doing because they are valued. And I think that's a reflection of you and your coaching style. And without that, I think goalkeeping world very easily could devolve into non-productive communication styles. Because
Yeah,
position.
boy, you're hitting at my heart here. I, again, I think if I am sucking the life out of them in my communication, what am I role modeling I want our environment to be? I can't say, hey, let's all be supportive of each other. And then the first time you have a great opportunity to gather feedback from a mistake, I'm on top of you. How can I expect them to act any differently? If I'm losing my mind at the refs on the sideline, how can I expect my team to be sportsmanlike
Yep.
when I'm role modeling complete idiocy as behavior?
Mhm. And even to the refs piece, if there's a call that everybody on the sideline thinks isn't a foul, but as the coach, I know it's a foul, I'm going to tell my team, nope, that's a foul. And that's the honesty piece, is being honest with all of your players and making sure that you're treating them with the respect that they deserve. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And so making sure that that's communicated, because that something you said earlier with regard to, why did you listen to that coach when he told you you couldn't do that? And I think there's times where maybe we forget the influence that we potentially have on players, because some players look up to their coaches. That's what they're looking to you for, um, not just soccer related improvement, but in some cases you're a role model. And so how are you, to your point, you have to be and handle yourself in a way that you expect them to handle themselves.
And that's just a great point on that topic. I mean, yeah, you just can't. It baffles me. And the influence part, it's not. I I f- I don't think about that too much, and I think it's maybe it's just maybe I'm secure that I'm operating in a way that's upstanding and uplifting, or however you say that. But I don't think about that too often. So it's good to every once in a while get that reminder of, hey, it just takes one little word and you could destroy a lot of things. The other thing you said that really hit me that I hadn't really thought of is everyone experiences the drill in a unique way, in their unique way. And I'm gonna have to chew on that one for a few days, I think. I love that. I try to gain at least one thing out of these, and I think that's my nugget out of this one. I gotta churn that one. Perspectives, and I really like that one. Um, but the last time, I gotta run respect your time here. We're getting close to an hour. So, last question here. As you've developed as a coach, as you've absorbed the knowledge of, you keep watching games and keep learning on the X's and O's and that side of things. And as you're in there working with the players more and between the ears and seeing how that performance mindset stuff works, how has your how has your approach or your mindset, your philosophy of coaching, how has that shifted um, as you've from when you started till as we sit here tonight?
Well, I mean, it hasn't been that long. Um, uh, I think one thing is trusting myself to communicate things well enough. Um, I'm gonna digress a little bit, but um, one of the biggest challenges that I've found coaching is articulating concepts or what I'd like to see in a way that is easily digestible, um, or that makes sense based on others' experiences. So because I've watched so much soccer, or even been a goalkeeper, there's certain things that um, I've found difficult to articulate how to sort of trigger specific concepts or thoughts in players, because that's something that maybe my memory's poor, whatever it is. I don't remember how I learned it. It's just there. And so now that it's there, it creates this difficulty in trying to communicate that and get the point across in a way that is going to be immediately understood. Um, and I think one of the biggest shifts, and again, hasn't been that long. I think one of the biggest shifts has been um, trusting and relying on the players on the team and the leaders on the team to help get those thoughts and ideas across. And so, in a lot of the sessions that I work on, I might say something and I might get looks that are like, what are you talking about? And I'm lucky enough to have a group of players that all, again, this is where the difference in experiences comes in. Um, I think I'm lucky enough on the JV side as well as in goalkeeper world to have players with different experiences. So there's always at least one player that understood what I said and is then able to reiterate it in a different way, that all of a sudden people, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why didn't you say it that way?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big growth piece, and growth opportunity on my end. Um, and to that same end, I think being able to articulate certain ideas a little bit better, um, and being more flexible in what I'm trying to get across, I think as well. Being able to pivot and something's not working, fix it. That's something that I think has improved from my coaching style, but um, I think overall there's so much to learn, regardless of how much playing experience somebody has, regardless of how much coaching experience somebody has. There's always somebody with a new idea. I think there's always opportunities to learn and grow. Um, and I hope that as I continue this journey, that hunger to continue to move forward and the opportunities. I've been blessed with the opportunity to be around a incredible set of coaches, and role models. And if I can continue those relationships and continue building additional relationships, my hope is that this just, you know, continues to grow and hopefully has a positive impact on others around me.
I love that adjust we must kind of mentality to abandon a drill. And um boy, it is so easy to say I am doing this for 12 minutes because it says I'm going to do it for 12 minutes, and
Yeah.
everything is going just all the wrong directions.
Yep.
I think that's tough. And the thing is, the other thing you made me think of is you talked about simplicity before and making things simple, and you referenced it as you were just talking too. It is not a simple task as a coach to to even say the word, to simplify things to the point where it is easily understood and digestible by everyone on the first take.
Yep.
There's complexity in simplicity.
Yep.
That's an interesting thought. And boy, the other thing I don't know why we were talking, you made me think of this though, is that eh, by com, over, I can't even speak tonight, by making things too complex, I think we have a tendency to train natural instinct out of athletes too. I guess that goes back to the robot a little bit. I catch myself sometimes saying, just quit thinking and save the ball. I- Quit fighting nature. It's making you inefficient. It's who knows what's going on. So, a lot of value to simplifying everything.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think as evidenced tonight, there are times where I can continue talking, adding additional detail that might not be immediately relevant or add too much value. And I think that sometimes those simple words, whether it's a positive idea, a positive thought, congratulation, um, things like that, can be so powerful without the need for extra.
Yeah, you're talking to Mr. Like to talk about in certain environments. In some, I'm like, don't say anything. Last thing, if you had a chance to talk to your younger self who is just starting out the goalkeeper journey way back there as a Penfield Ranger, what would you tell yourself?
Um, I guess find your passion earlier.
Earlier?
I think that's for me personally. It wasn't something that I realized I was as passionate about as I am. And I think, it's not a regret in any way, but there's certain things looking back, it's like, oh, if I had realized this earlier on, if I had decided that I wanted to push and continue to work through the difficulties of being an incredibly short goalkeeper, um, you know, never would have gone pro. I can safely say that. But at the same time, not not pushing forward to continue to experience um, the player side of soccer, I think is unfortunate. Um, but I wouldn't change anything because it's got me to where I am today. And I'm lucky enough to be in the position that I am. And there's lots of growth and opportunity and ability to continue pursuing my passion at this point. So,
I love that. Your path forges who you are. No regrets, right? It's what we made. Um, well, I know I can speak for all of us in Goalie World at Roberts. We're glad you refound your passion and are with us quite frequently to guide all of us further along in our experience. PJ, thank you. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad it finally worked out. I appreciate your time and all of your insights this evening. Um, and we will be seeing you soon.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I love talking to you. And there's always new tidbits that come out of every conversation we have. So,
That's why I love doing these. Have a great night, my friend.
thank you. You too.
Yep.